All right, this is Dave Ficken and Justin Hannemann in room 5 on the Friday mornings, 8:30 a.m. session entitled The Anti-Fragile Church Worker. Justin, anything you want to say to all the listeners out there?
Enjoy.
Profound words from Reverend Dr. Justin Hannemann.
All right.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Y'all are like on time this morning. This is amazing.
Your mom told us we had to be.
Oh, geez. Yep. She'll do that. She's always the timekeeper in the family, you know. Thrilled to have you in here. Please, in fact, if you're in the back and you want to make your way over here, so all the folks who hit the snooze button 3 or 4 times this morning have some space too. If you wouldn't mind, it'd be great. There's a chair here, a couple of chairs in the middle over here as well. So please come on, grab a seat. Really excited to dive into the very lighthearted topic of anti-fragility with you this morning. Dealing with real-life challenges and how you lead through those things. I'm Pastor Dave Ficken. Been a pastor, church planter in Nashville for a number of years. Now serve on the PLI team as North American Director. PLI has the incredible opportunity and blessing to partner with Reverend Dr. Justin Hannemann and Grace Point. PLI does a lot of training for pastors and spouses, where we create an even playing field for everyone that sits at that table, cross-culturally, men and women, leading alongside of each other for the sake of the kingdom. And we're doing that around the world. And in some of our training, Grace Point comes along and provides just some incredible training around kind of the psychology behind leadership, how we center ourselves in Christ and have a more stable place from which we lead. They do counseling with pastors and their spouses if they're married in 2 of our immersions in the Leadership Essentials learning community. And we've seen just incredible things come out of that. Some of the things that we've learned from Justin teaching in that space, and some of the takeaways is what we want to share with you today. A little bit about what it looks like, not just to be resilient in the face of the types of challenges that you're facing in your ministry today, but how do you actually get stronger? How do you become less and less fragile? How do you be an anti-fragile leader? So we're going to share in just a moment a couple of the key things that we're aiming for today, and then Justin's going to help us take a deep dive into that. But Justin, anything you want to say before we do that?
Yeah, at Grace Point, we're very thankful for our partnership with PLI and the sort of synergy that we are able to create. I think we're always looking for Kairos moments in life, and if you're looking for some of those, I think that this partnership really utilizes those moments for change. At Grace Point, we have offices in Lincoln and Omaha, clinical offices. We have 10 clinicians. We have an office that's going to be expanding in Columbus. So we have Grace Point Christian Counseling. That's one end. And then the other end is Grace Point Center for Ministerial Health. And we provide assessments, intensives, and treatment for workers. I like to see a lot of these familiar faces. I have a new Hawaiian friend that I met last week, and got friends from Nebraska and people from all over that. It's nice to see some familiar faces. With Grace Point, you'll notice that it says it's the Institute for Relational Health. So there is mental health, we have behavioral health, we have substance abuse treatment. There's lots of different angles that we can take on the human. And for us, we're coming at it from a very systemic perspective, that you can't treat an individual without understanding their context, without understanding the nature of the relationships that they're in. And at Grace Point, as we kind of seek to function as an extension of the healing ministry of Jesus, we notice that it is about relational health, the vertical relationship that Christ makes perfect, and then what that means for us horizontally with ourselves, with our primary others, and with creation itself. And so we're working at those levels all the time, and I think you'll see some of that in the presentation as well.
Our hope today is to hopefully give you some handles to think through some of the challenges that you're facing, probably give some take-home things for you to do, but also an opportunity for this not to be theoretical, but for you to press in, and hopefully this can be a blessing to you as a woman of God, as a man of God. That the Lord wants to nurture your soul, not just speak to the title or position that you have in ministry. In fact, you'll probably hear that bubble up a lot in what we're talking about. So let's give a little overview. Justin, you want to click to the next slide?
Yeah, Dad always said, tell him what you're going to tell him, and then tell him, and then tell him what you told him. So
there he goes. So we're telling you what we're going to tell you, okay? You might want to take a picture of this screen. Here's some of what we're going after today, okay? I'd like to quote my good friend, Reverend Dr. Justin Hannemann, who told me one time, a good leader is a secure leader. Come on, you guys. There's plenty of room over here, too. There's a really comfy hardtop desk over here for you to sit on.
There's got a chair right here between these two big guys.
Yeah, please come on in. A good leader is a secure leader. My guess is somewhere along the way, if we were to just ask everyone, what's the definition of a good leader? We probably have as many different definitions as there are people in the room. But for the sake of our time together here today, think about being a good leader means being a secure leader. If you're not secure in who you are and whose you are, which is what we'll dive into a lot about today, your opportunity, your capacity to be a good leader is significantly diminished. A secure leader is also somebody who has to wrestle with the reality that our churches are in a constant state of change. And what Justin's going to do is kind of unpack some of why this is a big deal, right? Change, psychologically, is a threat to security and homeostasis. Justin's going to unpack this, but this is where we're going. Our systems, churches, are always looking for homeostasis. Right? So the term sacred cow, ooh, don't touch that. Don't. Oh, okay. So yeah, you've wrestled with that, right? Speaking of homeostasis, why can't we just keep things the way that we are? And it's not just for the sake of keeping things the way that they are. It's about a fear of loss. They don't fear change. They fear what they're going to lose with the change. That was a meaningful thing for me. That program is why I'm here today. My kids were baptized in that building. My grandkids, right? Like all those things. It's not because they resist change because they don't like the idea of change. It's they're afraid of what they'll lose. We're threatening homeostasis, right? Last thing there, therefore, how we lead with security directly impacts how we lead change. So if everything is in a constant state of change, then we want to consider our own posture of leadership so we can best lead that change. That posture is shaped in the security of who we are and whose we are.
So raise your hand if there is like a piece of your system that you're a part of that you would like to be different. Okay, so how we as individual components in our systems approach that change has a lot to do with how the rest of the system responds to us. And if we are coming at it from a place of insecurity, we instantly create the anxiety that resists the very effort we're trying to create. So being secure then helps us move into that space without that anxiety, which creates the resistance. It's not like he said, a reflexive. There are some people with no reflexes, like I have with my 5-year-old. It's like, can I have a cookie? No. Wait, yeah, you can have a cookie. We just finished dinner. but if we're entering into those spaces with that anxiety, we are literally creating the resistance to the change that we're trying to bring about. And insecurity is where that anxiety is coming from. So that kind of leads to this question of why. And for me, for the last, several years, we've been dealing with a lot of anxiety. And systems have been struggling in various ways. Leaders are suffering from decision fatigue, crisis fatigue. It's not even like the decision itself, right? We should probably wear the mask for one more month, And then, which felt reasonable to most of the people, but it's not like the decision itself that brings the anxiety, it's the response to the decision. And if you go into those situations insecure, then the response itself creates more response, and then we're upping the ante. And so one of the things that I've noticed in the last few years, and why we're talking about this, is that I hear and have been formed in, like lots of us, in the principles of leadership, and we're talking about this strategy and that strategy, and we're talking, this system of leadership versus that system of leadership, and it all kind of is at the behavioral level and even at the cognitive level, and which thoughts to think and which behaviors to engage in. I will tell you, you can learn all of that stuff, and you can be a rock star in all of that stuff. And if you're insecure, you will unconsciously manifest the resistance to your leadership. You will just create it at a subcortical level in the people around you, which means like underneath the thinking brain.
Which, to unpack that, means you're doing all the right stuff, but there's still something inside of you that's like, is this right? Like, am I doing the right thing? Are we going in the right direction? It's that inner turmoil.
Right. Yeah, so the why for me, and why we're talking about this, and I hope it's poignant for most, is that if you can raise your hand when I ask who's not insecure in here, then we have a problem. We all have our insecurities. So again, it's like security isn't about being perfect. It isn't about not having issues. It's about having a safe place and understanding of the self to deal with those insecurities, those failures, those even insufficiencies. And that level of security then helps us move forward with humility and compassion and a level of boldness that our insecurity won't let us move forward with.
For me, the why is Justin is serving leaders just like you, counseling, doing deep dives, intensives, going through with ministry leaders and spouses in the counseling room, trying to unpack all that shapes insecurity in us and what the gospel applied to that can do to any of us. For me, the reason why this is so important to me is because it's the only place where I've seen where my leadership can be anchored. It's not in a strategy or a trend or the next thing or some kind of program or whatever. No, it's like anchoring me and helping me discover who God created me to be, and knowing that when I understand that best and I'm secure in who I am and whose I am in Christ, then I've got a whole lot more to give to the world than just something I picked up in a book or let's give this a shot. And there's been plenty of experiences in ministry to rock my security. Whether it's like being in the pit, feeling completely hopeless, even like dead in some ways. Like, can there be any future in ministry? When Jesus starts to heal some of that stuff, you get a different security in His work and not your own. You've experienced the limitations of your own leadership or abilities. And when God resurrects that, you discover just a different possibility of what God can do. When I was trusting my own abilities, and I say that like I'm done doing that, right? Like, oh my gosh. When I fight that daily, right? the good news of the gospel is not just for you to teach it to others, but like, here's a place where God wants to root you and who you are in him. And for everyone that's in a leadership capacity in any way, shape, or form, I'm not talking titles, but if you have influence anywhere, Satan's always wanted to rock you in your securities first. Because when you lack the security, you can't lead. And that's why we want to press into that.
Right on. So we're talking about the relationship between security and leadership. We've gotten into that a little bit. I think leadership, among the many definitions, is adaptive change. So when you hear the word adaptive, there's lots of different angles and traditions that use that word. And for my purposes, when I think of adaptive, I think of sufficiently structured, yet sufficiently flexible. So the ability for the organism to integrate with its system in a healthy way, like abstractly. That's how I think of adaptive, what it means to be adaptive. So lots of people say, well, flexible and adaptive. And like those two are either synonyms or that they're related. And I think that gives the wrong impression, because there are times and situations when a fairly stiff structure is very adaptive, and there are times when the ability to be flexible is really adaptive. And so adaptive is that, I think that there's an element of conscious wisdom, but also innate reflex in us. And so when we're talking about relationships, I talk a lot about relational reflexes. What are your relational reflexes? Because that is how somebody else trained you to be adaptive in the relational world. Your relational reflexes aren't something until adulthood and through a lot of conscious work that you actually maybe gain some level of sovereignty over your relational reflexes. So the question at the beginning, when it comes to leadership and what it means to be adaptive, is who formed your relational reflexes and how good were they at that? And have you done any work about how they formed them? Because that will be like, most of the time, because of the way sin seems to kind of work its way into everything, it'll be maladaptive. In the sense that it'll do harm, create anxiety, create resistance to the sort of healthy developmental change that we're looking for. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that. But in my opinion, because the leadership in the church is a leadership of love, and it's a leadership of pointing somebody to the person that loves them more than we do, right? That type of leadership, we want to be adaptive and meet that need in our systems adaptively. And I think we'll flesh that out a little bit more. But for me, leadership is adaptive change. And I like that, and I picked that up from kind of a core value of PLI and integrated it with some of this material.
So if you were in the session yesterday, we talked about this in a very practical way. The opposite of adaptive leadership is technical leadership. Technical leadership assumes that there is a program, a solution, or an expert that already exists for where you need to go. So you can take what you heard from someone else, a program from another church, an observation from another church, and put it on your church, your context, and it should work like that. Adaptive leadership assumes there is no expert, no program, no Band-Aid approach to slap onto our current situation. It assumes that where we're leading is going to take us off the already surveyed map. It's taking us to where we don't yet know how to lead. In order to do that, you can't be secure in being, I'm the one who has the answers, I know where we're going, everybody follow behind me. That'd be a technical leadership security. To be secure in who you are helps you lead off the map. Does anybody feel like they're leading in ministry in a place where they don't have all the answers? Okay, there were 4 honest people and a whole bunch of liars in the room.
But a lot of awkward and uncomfortable grins.
Okay, good.
I read those as hands up.
Yeah.
Yes. Is that true? So this is in direct correlation. If you're thinking we need to lead where we don't know how to go yet, the only way forward is by becoming more secure in who God created you to be, so that you can lead when you don't know the answers. Let's keep going.
Okay. So adaptive change in leadership requires humility. Why? What role does humility play in change? So this gets at a kind of a question. And what I'd like to do, this is kind of where, if we were in a different setting, we would have some table discussion on this question, and we would kick that around a little bit. But when we think about leadership requiring humility, I'm totally willing and fully intend to get feedback from everybody. So we might cut into some Q&A time. But when you hear leadership requires humility and adaptive change requires humility, and you hear the question why, what's the first sort of things that come to mind? Popcorn answers.
We have to recognize that we don't have all the answers.
We don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
Admit your mistakes.
Make mistakes.
Vulnerability.
Vulnerability.
It's not about me.
It's not about me.
Able to hear others' opinions.
Ooh.
Other people might have to recognize.
Widen the circle of input on an issue.
Willing to be corrected.
Willing to be corrected.
Teachable.
Teachable.
Yeah.
So are insecure people able to practice humility? Insecure people have a whole host of ego defenses that, and some of the really sophisticated ones can look like humility. They're actually pretty sophisticated socially. But a genuine humility is like only flows from a secure place. It only flows from a secure place. And so if we're going to lead adaptive change, humility is going to be that kind of key element. And for me, humility and confidence go together. Humility and confidence go together. Some of the most confident people that I know themselves very, very well. They know the system that they're in very, very well. And they have a deep confidence. But partially because they feel like they can adapt to any situation because they're willing to take the feedback and all of the things that we just listed. They're willing to participate in the system with an open mind, with their confidence that they bring, but also with the humility required to take in more information and adapt. And whereas shame, and we could do a whole 16-week course on the topic of shame, but shame leads, I find that like humility and confidence are made of the same stuff, opposite sides of the same coin, and shame and pride and ego defense are made of the same stuff, opposite sides of the same coin. And so when we're talking about secure, we're just building out some of the vocabulary. When I'm talking about secure people, when I encounter them, I encounter confidence and humility. When I encounter insecure people, I encounter shame, sometimes like the debilitating sort of shame, or I encounter somebody who's incapable of receiving feedback of any kind, from anybody, for any reason. But that's the same insecurity, two different coping mechanisms. Same insecurity, two different pathways to dealing with it.
Yeah.
Okay. So these are some of the table questions, and you might want to write some of these down, kick them around after the session, catch me out there, and we'll talk about them. But what is change, and why do people want to change, and why do people who want to change rarely do so? And why is change so hard? And what do you want to change about yourself, your marriage, family, your ministry context?
Will you be publishing this out, or is it already?
Yeah, we'll figure out how to do that.
Do that.
Yeah, the best way to do that, by the way,
Yep.
in just a moment, there'll be a QR code that's up on the screen. You'll be able to put your email address in there. If you do that, then we can email you these slides.
And I think we can get it on the Hova, whatever that app is.
Yeah. I don't
What
know
is
how
it?
to do that, though, so we'll figure that out.
Okay, so this question, this is the question that gets at it for me, is why is change so stinking hard? And why, and I'm talking personally, it's like I'm going to do this, which means that I have to change these things. But these things, no matter, like, up here. I don't like those things. These things don't serve me. They're not fun for me. But I can't seem to change these things so that I can get this result. Anybody relate to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Preach.
What is the experience when we're trying to look at those things that we don't like? What is our personal experience? Oftentimes it's shame. And when we're in a shame place, like, we have really predictable coping mechanisms for shame. And those things lead us into the same patterns of behavior that gave rise to it. So the experience we get when we look at the things that we want to change cut us off at the knees to do the things that would make the change possible. And that is really at an unconscious level. And so I have some counselor friends here, and they talk about the orders of change, right? So there's kind of this first order of change that lots of us can engage in, like, well, I'm going to go to the store and get nicer clothes, and I'm going to wear nicer clothes tomorrow. Okay, change. Nice.
That's a fun one, though.
Yeah, I
I will make that change anything.
know. Yeah, right? There's not much resistance to that one for you, huh?
Who defines nice?
Yeah, right. Great question. So there's this first order change, and it's interesting because when I was getting into the therapy business, it's like, hey, they reported change, they did some things, and some stuff happened, and then, I'm excited, and then, why they're actually there seems impervious to change. And it's just maddening, and you couldn't figure it out. And then I looked at myself and was like, oh, yeah, same exact pattern. And that's a deeper second order of change that requires some personality stretching, that usually requires other people and events in the system to bring about the change. And so why is change so hard? And because we have this natural paradox of change, where the harder we try to change, the deeper the deficit that we're trying to operate from to bring the change about. So that's why it requires humility. So change is a challenge to homeostasis. And I want you to think not of homeostasis as a set point, but as a range. So this is also kind of what pushes back against change, is that the thermostat in my office, my clinical office, is a good example of this. It's upsetting because the range is like 6 degrees. It's a thermostat that goes from, in the winter, 64 to 70 degrees. So it'll heat it up to 70 degrees, and then nothing happens until it gets to 64. But it's it's like running right through 64, and then it turns back on, right? That range is a dynamic homeostasis. And that's what we are as living organisms, and that's what our systems are. They have so it's like, we can create some first order change, and people get excited, and there's some new people coming in, or whatever the metric is. But then there's this point at which it hits the thermostat, and then it regulates. The system regulates. So you can think of an actual thermostat as getting anxious. It's 69 degrees. It's 7 degrees. Boom! Not expending any more energy. And it's just like that in human systems. We hit this threshold of anxiety, and then whoop, it quits. So another topic. So you want to think of homeostasis and change in that dynamic sense. But I also this is like a key value lately. Transformational change. Right, we've heard that. I'm all about transformational change, love transformational change. But if you go for transformational change, the thermostat will cut you off at your knees. Transformational change, in my opinion, transformational change for me is developmental first. That there's a development, I look at my son Kaiser, he's 14, he's 6'3", 200 pounds. I looked at him 2 years ago, and he's a little kid, and now there's a man walking around my house. And that is a transformation. And there was lots of pain involved in that happening over 2 years.
It ain't over, buddy.
and it ain't over. It ain't over. So like, we can think of horizontal systemic forces creating developmental change. Meaning these natural things in the system that create development. And if you look at people and you tell them, hey, we have some development to undergo, and they're not operating from a really deep shame place, they go, and I say something along the lines of, well, has anybody ever like talked to you about this or taught you this? And they're like, no. Well, don't worry about it. We'll just develop these capacities. And that takes the shame away and the resistance to the change. It's fascinating how easy that can be. And I think this is intuitive for most educators and intuitive for most of us. So there are like these horizontal systemic forces that move change about. And we don't generally resist all of those very much, like unless we have some really deep pathologies. But most of the time, just developmental stuff happens naturally. And if we're mindful of it, we can kind of nudge. And it takes minimal effort that doesn't trigger the homeostatic sort of regression. So we think of maturity and growth. But transformational change on its face is what kind of we all want. But as soon as we try to like implement it, the system goes, nope, cuts it off. Thermostat has been offended and like cuts off the energy flow. And then we get shamey and more mad that we're not transforming. So when you use the transformational language, I always want to come back on the backside when we're trying to lead change and say, but like the Spirit can do it. And we'd love for the Spirit to do it today. And sometimes it happens. And I've borne witness to that, and I think it's beautiful. And so we're not going to limit God in any way. But you pray for that. But if it doesn't happen tomorrow, you might have to do some work. And then some more. And then some more. And like, I don't want you to think about some more and some more and some more. I just want you to be in the present moment in this developmental context, and we can work through it. It's like, and this is like one of the key findings for me in doing therapy. It is breathtakingly sad how much you can get done in an hour. And it's breathtakingly amazing what an hour a week for a year can do to somebody's psyche. It's just profound to me. And that will never, I mean, that's what keeps me coming back.
So thinking about it over the course of time, if you're introducing change in your ministry, transformational change is the big announcement today. We launched this thing, get on board, right? This leadership posture usually looks more like, if this fits you, you can stay here at this church. But if this isn't your jam, then we want to politely invite you to get off the bus, right? That type of thing. That's that. I mean, there's just been that lingering, like business influence type of leadership posture that's been out there floating, and it looks like this. But the question isn't asking so much people to get off the bus as it is asking them, will you take steps with me? And that's that developmental change that Justin's talking about. Like here, it's changing the thermostat from 70 degrees to 100 degrees right now. This is gradually changing the range of the thermostat, where today it might be between 64 and 70, but over the next few weeks we're going to go to 65 and 71. And we're going to change the range together so that we still feel together in this. And we're working through how it might feel a little bit warmer than it did 6 months ago, but we're leading that together.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I will say that transformational change, like event versus trauma. So sometimes it's an event that creates the change, transformational change, and we might even subjectively experience it as really positive. And then sometimes it's a trauma, which we subjectively experience as really negative. But it's something, so it comes vertically from outside, usually the system immediately, and it like just comes with such force that the thermostat doesn't have a choice.
Yeah.
And like on the surface, dreaming for something like that is fine and good, like I think of what is the Asbury College right now? They got that thing going. It's like that is the exception that argues the rule, right? Like it's so amazing. I think a lot of people are experiencing revival, but like anybody else feel like, hey, where's God? Why isn't that happening right here all the time with where I'm at? And I think it's because lots of times we get attracted to this. We get attracted to this for change. And my experience is that it can happen, both in good and very bad ways. Most of the time bad in my experience. But this is what is sustainable and possible most of the time. And so if God's going to do something else, that's God's business.
Yeah, some of the change you lead because you have the opportunity to move forward in that and lead that change. Some of the change you have to respond to because it happened to you. And you have to respond in such a way where it's like this trauma thing, like, wow, things won't be the same because of what happened to us
Right.
in our context.
I know you've got a presentation, but you've said these.
Justin.
I know. And I realize there's more nuance to this conversation, right? But you said transformational and developmental kind of, it seems, in dichotomy to each other. But
They're not.
okay, yeah. So
It's developmental leading.
the
It's
nuance.
developmental leading to transformation.
Okay.
But it's like the one piece at a time. I like a Johnny Cash song,
Yeah.
you know, or the yeah. It's like one piece at a time, and then he gets a car, and then what if he just keeps like changing parts? I mean, there's transformation ultimately over time, but it's one piece at a time.
So because there's, like I'm thinking like in a, maybe not in an individual life, but in a congregational life, there might be like a certain group of leadership that's going through this developmental change of these, we're changing the range of the thermostat, but then when they make the announcement of, hey, we're launching this thing that we've been developing for, somebody's going to experience it as transformational, or it's like making toast, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's not toast, it's not toast, it's not toast, it's burned.
right.
Right, that developmental can, like, we're making steps, it doesn't look like anything's changing, things have changed.
Yeah, and in systems, it's always about awareness.
Yeah.
And somebody might not. I mean, it's the frog in the kettle thing. You know, there's a moment that somebody goes, "Hey, I'm boiling alive in my church that doesn't look like it was," and then they make a big. And then again, you're addressing resistance, the homeostatic resistance to change. And that, as far as I can tell, is the state of leadership.
And Justin, would you say that the way to navigate that, certainly you can't have, board meetings and invite the whole congregation, you got 200 voices, right? You're absolutely right, but I think that the bridge between that often gets missed is relationship and communication, right? It's decisions being made to people instead of conversations, and we go together utilizing relationship and communication.
Yep. So, is this what you were looking for? Development leading to transformation.
That's good.
Development.
You can pay me later for leaving.
You're welcome.
What an incredible segue to this slide. I love
He
it.
was my catcher at the SEM, so he can
Awesome.
give me grief whenever he wants to. Secure enough to use stress and anxiety to promote growth and development, not self-protection. So what does security do is that when you feel secure, you can expend resources to develop and grow. But when you feel insecure, you hoard resources, time, money, energy, all relationships, others. It's like, no, I don't really want you going and talking to that person, because if you go talking to that person, they'll want something of you. So I'm going to hoard you here. And I see this on church staffs all the time. And that just creates a very reductive system, insecure systems. But where the secure system then is operating from a place of abundance, it's operating from a place of like, God's got this whole thing anyway, so let's let it rip and see what God can do. Mm-hmm. And when you're moving from that place of security, you then will feel stress and anxiety, but you can use it to promote growth and development, not self-protection. So this is the relationship between security and development. We know this from early childhood, and I'll talk a little bit about that, is like insecure children don't develop. Like literally, I mean, some very extreme, awful cases, where if they don't have proximity to caregivers, their bodies, brains, like their physiology doesn't develop. So like development and relationship, in particular relational security, across the lifespan is absolutely critical.
Which is why you see such a tension between institution and innovation. Institution is always established. This is historical. I'm not pointing fingers at any denomination or anything like that, right? Institution is always built to sustain the initial good of a movement or what came out of innovation, right? Because we want to preserve or protect the good that's happening here. In fact, we want to help it scale and for more people to get a hold of it. But at some point in the life cycle of an institution, the institution starts losing ground instead of helping secure more ground like the movement or innovation was originally intended to do, and it gets in the way of itself because it starts going into protection mode and not growth and development, right? Theologically, this is building the walls higher and preserving what we have instead of being mission-oriented and outreach-focused.
It's the best way to lose a football game.
Absolutely.
Prevent defense.
A good defense is a good offense, right?
So a secure leader and a mature leader is usually one that, rather than answering a question directly, asks a question back to develop that person that's asking the question, right?
Why do you say that?
Well done.
I almost took the bait. Nice try. So, but what we're talking about here, and this is where the anti-fragility language comes in. And how many of you have read The Coddling of the American Mind? Okay? So Jonathan Haidt's stuff, he's a social psychologist, brilliant. He's written several books that I find to be useful and meaningful, not coming from a Christian perspective, but it's really insightful into the way we work. And in this book, The Coddling of the American Mind, he appropriates Nicholas Nassim Taleb's anti-fragility principle, and uses it in the psychological sense. And it's really just really descriptive and helpful, which is why I use it. So, teacups are fragile, right? Right? I have a Kong chew toy that's been like in the yard for years, more than one dog, like more than one mower, and it's still recognizable as a chew toy. So it's extraordinarily resilient, right? But resilience in the strict sense of the word. So do we have any resilience researchers here? Because there was maybe a doctoral level one in a presentation in Nashville. So I had to be... That's right. Yeah. So... resilience in the strict sense of the word is a degree of fragility. Now, resilience research, if you're into that, they appropriate resilience and talk about different levels and kinds of it, and one of the kinds is anti-fragility. I just prefer to use the word anti-fragility in contrast to resilience. So, in terms of a leader, would you rather be fragile or resilient? Okay. I'd rather be resilient, and some days call for just flat resilience. But what happens, like from the moment you take the chew toy out of the package, what is happening? It's decaying. Anti-fragility is something very different. So we have fragile, teacup, but then you have anti-fragile, like a human muscle fiber. We are adaptive, dynamic systems that God made for this world. And so, in one sense, we're like the chew toy, because we're all marching toward the grave. Like, sin is fatal, and it's got 100%. But we also have this life in us that God gave us that we have this adaptive capacity that if I, go and lift with my friend Duncan, and we like get after it at Goodyear Fitness Center in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we tear all of our muscles down, and then we go and we eat a bunch of steaks, what happens to those muscles? They come back stronger than they were before you stressed them out. And secure leaders will take stress, anxiety, resistance, and they will become stronger for it. That is anti-fragility. And if we don't lead with that, it betrays our insecurity, number one. And number two is it creates anxiety with our system. Every traumatized child I ever worked with is checking to see if I'm anti-fragile in a million different ways. Like, what if I spin around in my chair? Well, is he going to get upset? What if I tell him I hate him and I think he's stupid? What if I pee in the fridge in the middle of the night? Will you still love me then? Like, the world and sin and the people we're called to care for, to love, will create that. Now, what is the deepest image of this in the history of humanity? Like, putting Jesus on the cross, like taking his life away, which we're all guilty of. And what happens? That death is the stressful event that every human being can't come back from. But Christ does. And the deep, I won't preach this from a pulpit, but I'll say it here. That's the deepest anti-fragile move of all time. Resurrection from the dead for our life.
Yeah.
And I think that there's moment by moment and day in and day out when we mirror that love. When we mirror that commitment. And say, yeah, like this sucks, and it's hard, but I'm in the secure arena with people I trust and love, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to get stronger because of it. That's anti-fragile leadership in my opinion. And it's something I aspire to and fail at in my home, in my clinical practice, probably here today somehow. But again, can we admit that? And then can we learn from it? And can we partner with each other and move through it? That's anti-fragility in my opinion. Good?
I feel like there's still a bunch of slides. I wanted to say something, but just keep going, man.
Okay. So adaptive change results from and facilitates resilience and anti-fragility. So it's cyclical. It's cyclical as we work on all these terms. Security is a necessary condition of adaptive change. We're going to skip case study.
Yep.
We're going to skip case study. Okay, principle one, resilience is a short-term strategy, which is good. And it's a short-term strategy you can use over and over again if what? If there's repair. After the time of resilience. So this is how I relate anti-fragility and resilience. Is that there's a season of resilience. Like, oh, this workout's terrible, but I'm going to keep going. Right? I'm going to keep going. I'm going to be resilient to every homeostatic principle in my entire biological system saying, stop! No, one more rep. Okay. That's resilience. But then, there's a higher ordered anti-fragility season that needs to come in to repair. And if you do it right, that repair gets you further ahead than you were when you started the stressful event. Anti-fragility then is sustainable. Resilience on its own is not sustainable. It can't be. In the strict sense. This is something that I run into a lot working with workers. I can be as tough as an old boot. I can weather this.
Yeah.
It's just a season. If I hear that phrase. Oh, it's just a season. Okay. Is the season over yet? And what are we going to do afterwards? Or is that just what we tell ourselves to pretend that we're resilient all the while we're just decaying? And you might have the gift of the chew toy where you decay slower than other people because you're tough. Good for you. But there is this point when that becomes maladaptive.
In the military, during the wars in Afghanistan, resilience was the big thing.
Uh-huh.
This is exactly right. Everybody was tough, everybody could do it, but there was still this continual decay. And there was nothing to replace that.
What do we-
It's not sustainable.
Yeah, what are you doing when you come home?
Right back.
Yeah. Yep.
That is a leadership myth that you see, that this is just a season and this will be over soon, and I can continue to be resilient because the stressors won't be as bad somewhere down the road, right? It also shows up in our strategic planning or visioning sessions, right, where we're like, where do we want to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And I'm thinking that all the time. That's like, just God wired me to always think that way. But what I have to build into that planning is the anticipation of sabotage along the way. Like, there's going to be conflict. It's not going to be the way I'm dreaming it up right now. It's not going to go according to plan. And the question is, will I be resilient when we face some challenges? But are we building capacity within our teams, within our staff, within our church, to be able to adapt out of who we are and whose we are, our security in Christ, so that when the sabotage does come, the conflict does come, it doesn't go the way that we wanted it to, we're going to be an adaptive group of people to respond when the curveball comes, even though we're expecting the fastball, right?
Yeah, and it becomes a kind of a cognitive behavioral mentality that you just apply to your life day in and day out. And it's kind of fun to watch it. I have a 14-year-old, like I said, and he played football. And like senior, like knocks him down, and he comes home. And he's like, "Oh man, I got knocked down by the senior," and he just kind of like beat up about it. And I guess maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. And I'm like, "You're 14, like you'll be okay." and we talk about, well, what did you learn from that? Well, I learned that I don't want to like take him on head on. Well, so what are we going to do? Well, you probably should use those like techniques that coach taught you. So like that is just a simple example of how like we learn like it to take the knock and learn from it. But like what's really cool is that as the season goes on, like going into practice, like I hope somebody just hands me my lunch so I can learn how that won't happen on Saturday. You know? Like, can you get in your mind that, well, I hope there's a really disgruntled elder that gives me grief today, then I can learn how to manage it.
Yeah, I showed up to all those
There's a
meetings
fine
after-
line between that and just masochism, which I'm not advocating. Okay,
Yeah, just real quick too, resilience might have been a leadership posture before in a Christendom world and paradigm. It is not sustainable in a post-Christendom. Like, anti-fragility is the only way forward the more and more Christendom we experience in our culture.
yes, and just to clarify so that I don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
Resilience training is critical, and resilience training for our children is critical. And I think that all the resilience trainers that I talk to end up going, yeah, that's what we're talking about. When we're talking about anti-fragility, right? And I think that that's great. And so we're going to talk about resilience and anti-fragility, and we'll probably use them interchangeably. But I think it's super helpful to distinguish them, particularly in the developmental arc of a situation, of a system, of a problem. Like in Kaiser, it's like, well, just get back out there, get knocked down by the senior. And I'm thinking, well, he'll learn from that. And he's thinking, I don't want to go get knocked down again. But I guess Dad says go be resilient. No, like, okay, now what are we going to do? We go out in the garage and we get out the tackling dummy and we work on swim moves and your rips so you don't take the full force of a 285-pound senior when you're a freshman. Okay, so like that's resilience and anti-fragility. So I see your resilience and I raise you anti-fragility. Yes, anti-fragility results from intra and interpersonal security. So security in the self, meaning a relationship with the self that isn't marked by debilitating shame. It's always marked by shame of some kind, but like not the debilitating paralysis level shame. And interpersonal security, which is intimately linked to the shame thing, which is, are my intimate relationships secure? am I secure in them? So how do we develop intra and interpersonal security? What time is it?
Yeah, like 30 minutes.
Okay. So for me, intrapersonal security, who and whose you are. I have a cute anecdote about that, but we'll skip it.
You should give it. You should give it. You
Yeah?
should give- yeah.
Okay.
It's about your dad, right?
Yeah, so Dad, I'm a pastor's kid, and we were raised in a little town in Michigan with a church, so church 1700. Anybody know Millington, Michigan? Okay. Yeah, Millington, Michigan. So 1,700 people in the church, members of the church, and it was a town of 1,100. And it goes with this Saginaw Valley myth that there are more Lutherans than people. And so like,
Dead people on the boat.
yeah, like everybody around knew that this is pastor's kid. And so he drops me in, I'm like 5th or 6th grade, and he drops me and my brother off at the high school football game Friday night. And he could say, when I'm getting out of the car, don't get in any fights, don't steal anything, be respectful to people. And he goes down this, down the list of all the things that I'd be inclined to do at a football game as a 6th grader. And instead, right, he says, Justin, remember who you are and whose you are.
Amen.
And take care of your little brother. Got it. And like, for me, that identity level coaching was very meaningful to me and is a piece of security because it's a declaration. It's not a question. I mean, it's a declaration. You know who you are. And that knife cuts both ways, which is, don't embarrass me. I got that out of it sometimes. But it is also like, live into who God has made you.
Yeah.
Live into that. And I think that level of intrapersonal security, this is what's ironic, is that you can't manufacture that yourself.
Right.
You can try, but you can't. It's going to come in relationship to primary others. How many of you know the book You Are What You Love? Highly recommend it. In particular, life liturgies. That if you're not engaging in life liturgies and doing, like, in the words of Young, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. And so I'm this. I know who I am, but all of my behaviors and relational interactions indicate that I'm really not that person. And that is not going to lead to intrapersonal security. So engaging in those liturgies that God says, well, people who love me do these things. Like, it's good law. It's healthy law. It's good for you, and it trains you in what to love. So I call it, in my clinical practice, I call it the muted camera question. If I had a cameraman following you around, no sound, right, and I just followed you around for a week, what would it be that you love?
Yeah.
What would it be that you love? And that's the life liturgies that I think are powerful. And then finally, cognitive behavioral therapy is this wonderful gift of managing your thought life and all of the distortions that emerge. And one of the really common distortions that emerge from people who've been hurt, wounded, traumatized, done stupid stuff is I'm a piece of trash. And that thought of self-destruction in all its various forms, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in our central nervous system. And our anxiety systems will say, down at the bottom of our brains, is there something wrong? Because they do that. It just happens naturally to lots of us. And then our top part of our brain go, I know what's wrong. I'm wrong. And then the central nervous system goes, you're right. You should be anxious. And then the top brain goes, I am anxious. There must be something wrong with me. And practice it 1,000 times. And so CBT really helps interrupt that. And if you just got some of that self-talk that's damaging, I just highly recommend finding somebody who's trained in it and can help you interrupt it. Interpersonal security, attachment security. And this is, like, for me, the secret sauce to the whole conversation. And then social emotional intelligence. So when I talk about attachment security, everybody in here has reached physical adulthood, right? So we all received enough care either by like our parents or by a society with a ton of resources and like cultural inertia that brings us all to a physical adulthood. We're all like intellectually adults, arguably. Justin, I don't know, you know, right? Yeah, he was a catcher, right? But so was I. It was a problem. Head trauma. So we have these like domains of development that our society has been for quite a while really good at making sure everybody gets to. I think we're noticing that maybe there's some cracks in that. Yeah. But our educational systems, particularly in our parochial system, like we don't, I mean, people are developing physically, intellectually. Lots of times they're developing socially, because you go and you're in a classroom and you learn what not to do and what to do, and you learn at least a basic social 14, 15-year-old maturity level that you can reach. And so most of the people walking around look like they're adults in these domains, and we would assume that they're adults in other domains. And they're not. Like, so if I were to put it in order, our society's great at making physical adults. We're second good at making intellectual adults. We're third bad at making social adults. We're pretty terrible at making emotionally healthy and intelligent adults. And we've completely abandoned making spiritual adults. And the attachment realm is the emotional and spiritual adulthood. That's where it happens. And if it doesn't happen there, it's not happening. So, attachment. Attachment security is what we're going for. The enduring emotional bond that connects one person to another across time and space. I'll go through some of this really quickly, but I have a million resources on this. This is, like I said, what I believe to be the secret sauce and what my PhD was in, and interpersonal neurobiological implications of attachment and all of that. Use that word at your next party. The experience of safety in close relationships, primarily formed in early adulthood, has both conscious and unconscious elements, has strong correlation to the types of relationships we find ourselves in later in life. We'll make this all available to you. Is tied heavily to implicit memory, and I think this is what's critical, is that we have like conscious memory, and we never have the same memory twice because the context in which we recall the explicit memory is always different, so it reshapes the memory 100% of the time. But our implicit memory is pretty powerful because like there are sanctuaries that I can walk into and kind of get the, because I had some really negative traumatic experiences in there. And there's like people that I like am around that you get an implicit physical memory of. Like I walk and I see that I have this implicit memory of you, Michael. Like and I just want a big hug and I want you to pray for me. So like that implicit memory is very positive. So there's really positive ones and there's really negative ones, right? And there are a lot of nuances to that, but at the end of the day, it's kind of binary. Safe, not safe. Secure, not secure. So Michael, you make me feel secure routinely, thank you. So this attachment security is tied to implicit memory in our body, in our neurophysiology. I'm going to skip that one. It is marked. Yeah. So I was going to use that, but so it's marked by exploration and proximity seeking. So you think of a child. Let's say a 2-year-old. That's good. That will be all right. 2-year-old. Mom, like walks into a room, sits down, sets the, let's say 18-month-old on the ground, right? The child just scurries away and explores the room. That's healthy attachment because the child's going out and developing. Then what happens when the child's out there developing? Pinches his finger in the Legos. He screams, right, which draws the caregiving system's attention to him. And then he usually has locomotion to his primary source of support and security. Now the sensitivity of the caregiver has a lot to do with the care receiver, the child's experience of safety. So this is what's interesting. If I'm in the living room and one of my children gets distressed and my wife's sitting next to me, who do they go to? Why? Because I say rub some dirt on it. Because, no, I don't. I mean, but they are used to a maternal presence, their primary attachment figure, breastfed since, from birth to a year old. They have that bond with mom, and they are securely attached to her. So like immediately when they get distressed, they go to her. And so now I have a 14-year-old male, and he like goes to mom, and she goes, talk to your dad. It's interesting how across time these attachment figures can shift, but it is about this exploration into the world, the distress that inevitably happens in the world, and then the proximity seeking to the safe place. Now there are a million layers that I want to talk to you about in this. One of the most obvious is the church a secure attachment figure for the people in your community? No. That's one, right? No. But more importantly, are you in the child scenario as the child? Do you have secure people that you seek proximity to that can co-regulate you, so that you can go back out and explore, and then inevitably get distressed and return to and get distressed, and that's the cycle. So connection, rupture, repair. Connection, rupture, repair until Jesus comes back. That's the process. And if you're in that cycle where the repair is a little bit more robust than the rupture, then you're securely attached. It's not about the absence of rupture. That's not security. It's about, is the repair more robust than the rupture?
This happens when you recruit volunteers to a position that are actually requiring leaders, not volunteers. So it's like, hey, sign up for this, and you'll get to do this in our church. And then like a few weeks in, they discover, wait, I could have used some training on this before. Like, I'm really surprised you wanted me to oversee the entire Sunday school thing and didn't ask me when the last time I was in Sunday school. But you're a warm body, and you can fill this volunteer position. Right? I'm not talking, you guys don't do this, but those people out there who do that, what happens when they experience stress in a way that they think is going to define them and not teach or shape the system for something better? They're going to be questioning, is there a safe haven for me to return to? Or is my time as volunteer, really leader, done because I didn't meet somebody else's expectations?
Yeah, so the way that I would say this is, like, we have our intimate family relationships, our primary others. So at Grace Point, right, God, self, primary others, and creation itself. God's self, primary others operate by the rules of attachment, really. Like, our brains respond in those relationships. So I always kind of joke that there are two types of relationships on the planet: attachment relationships and everything else. Like, attachment relationships stir us at a level that no other relationships stir us, like literally neurologically. And so we're much more hypersensitive, which is why, like, when I went to Dietrich's first kindergarten parent-teacher conference, Dietrich is this beautiful, wonderful kid. He stands in line, and he keeps his hands to himself, and he's like doing great in school. And I'm like, last name's Hannemann. There must be another Dietrich in the class. But at home, he's got a different brain than he does in the social situation at school. And that's how we operate. Here's the problem: is that there are lots of people that we serve who are going to make you and the church attachment figures. And their brains will respond to you at that level, and you have to kind of be awake to that reaction. It's not just governed by the sheer social intelligence at that point. There's something deeper than social intelligence at play there, and we should be sensitive to it, I think. So that person who is facilitating exploration and proximity seeking is a safe haven, meaning like this place to retreat into. Ship out in the ocean gets distressed and it comes to the safe haven. But that same relationship functions as a secure base. So we have safe haven caregiving and secure base caregiving. Secure base caregiving equips and sends out and says, go explore, go make mistakes. And then the safe haven is, I'm here, come back in, I'm a safe place, you can tell me about your failures, we can regroup and then get back together and head back out. Okay? I'm seeing an overwhelming problem in the caregiving is primarily safe haven caregiving. That's what we prioritize as a society right now. we're not prioritizing as much secure base caregiving, in the sense that, like, we got, you know, the snowplow parents and the helicopter parents and the helicopter pastors, and we're not equipping people to do life. And then we wonder why resilience levels and anti-fragility aren't manifesting themselves on a regular basis. So both safe haven caregiving and secure base caregiving are critical for this security that we're talking about to lead well. So I feel kind of disingenuous if I come to Kat, my wife, and I complain about something, and she's like super sweet. Those of you who know what I'm talking about. And she'd be like, "Oh yeah, Justin, they're being unreasonable." And if I know that they're not being unreasonable and that I'm being unreasonable, and she like placates me, right? And she's gonna just be the super safe haven for me, it feels wrong, right? And so she's gotten better over the years, going, "Well, I think you're being an idiot," and that's like helpful, to a degree, you know, in that secure base caregiving. So like being wise on both secure base and safe haven, being willing to be bold and go to those places, I think is also a feature of that secure leadership. So connection, rupture, repair. Secure base, this is how it goes, right? Secure base.
I think they're going to like the artwork on the whiteboard better than that, but...
So I love talking about it as children, but the whole point is, like, we all need it, from birth to death, right? Secure base, support my exploration, watch over me. This is the key one. Delight in me while I'm out there. Delight in me, help me, enjoy with me, be with me out there. Okay? But I'm going to get distressed, so that I need you to welcome me coming back to you. Protect me, comfort in me, delight in me. Right? So equipping, promoting growth, development, even saying, you know, go out there, you're probably going to take a shot. That senior might knock you over again. But we're going to learn from it, because you come back here and we'll watch video. And we'll figure out a way to deal with it. Okay? So... And it isn't the content, it's the process of connection, rupture, repair.
So a lot of times, right, this probably resonates because you're like, are you broken? Are you hurting? Has the world got you down? Like, come find a safe place here. Be who you are. Come as you are type of language. Come to our church. That's that safe haven. Here's a safe place for you to be, right? Important. It's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. Sending people is also a part of it. And the way that you send people so that they know they can have a safe haven to return to is by creating safe landings and make sure that they know that failure won't define them, but it will teach us together. Right? So the reason why the Wright brothers chose Kitty Hawk, North Carolina to test how to fly the airplane was because there's sand dunes and there's soft landings. They expected to crash. We're testing things. Something's not going to go the way that we want it to. So let's do it where we might not get as hurt, right? Because they knew they'd have a safe place to land. When we're sending people, when we're equipping leaders in our churches, when we're asking them to go serve in their community, and probably not even like training them like we should be, are they willing and do they know they have a soft place to land when it doesn't go the way that they probably feel you expect it to go?
Amen.
You mentioned this forms in early childhood, but this continues through college and so on, right?
Continues across the entire lifespan.
Yeah.
So I need primary attachment security all the time, and I have it in a very tight group of people.
It's in your marriage.
Yeah.
It's in your leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Very few church workers have safe haven.
Right.
And so how does that affect the cycle when the leader does not have safe haven to go back?
It creates a very anxious system.
Yeah, that's insecurity.
And in a million different unique ways, but I would just describe it as a very anxious system.
In
Because-
some
Would
ways,
you be like the LCMS?
I mean, maybe. So,
real quickly,
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Grace Point exists. That's why PLI exists. Because everybody's asking, is anybody here to listen to me? Not because we're self-centered, but because we're looking for the safe haven. We're constantly saying, come on everybody, we're going, here we go, here's the vision. and we don't know that there's a safe place to land for us. In fact, in most places, the only safe haven we have, and the reason why we keep coming back, is because there's a pension plan and there's health insurance. I mean, I'm not trying to be harsh,
Well, that's real.
but it's real, and I've experienced it in my own life, and I see it
But-
all the time.
And there's lots of really interesting studies, and maybe the most famous is the rhesus monkeys study, where, and this is very telling. So they have these little baby monkeys, and they have a wire mother. It's made out of hard, stiff wire that has a bottle. And then they have a fluffy mother, like stuffed monkey, right? The theory was that really all they want is the pension and the milk and the food and the safe bed and like just the functional stuff that humans need to survive bodily. And that's the limit of attachment security. But these like baby monkeys would run and they would take drinks from the bottle, right? And it was hypothesized that they would stay with the wire mom because wire mom has the food. No. They would go to the fluffy mom. Because what they wanted was comfort and safety. Like, there's something a little bit different than meeting our basic physiological needs and psychological safety and security. And that makes sense because God made us super social. He made us for relationships. And there's a currency that's a little bit deeper than, hey, you have food for me today. That's why just making it to physical adulthood doesn't mean that you're going to be emotionally or spiritually intelligent or mature. So what is the currency of attachment? It's affect. What's happening here?
You're singing.
Right? You've seen this one. Endless love duet? No, they're fighting. Okay, what about this one? What's the affect say? He's screaming. She's saying be quiet. Uh-huh. What about this one?
They're arguing, their child is just sitting there going, what do I do now?
There's a helpless, sad affect there. So, like, what does that face do to all the caregivers in here? What do you want to do? You want to go give her a hug? Yeah. That's a very natural response to that affect. How about when somebody makes this face at you? How about that face?
You want to punch him?
Right. Okay. So affect is the currency. So affect regulation then is necessary for purposeful change. And how do you learn to regulate? Insecure attachment relationships. So what is the role of security in leadership? The ability to regulate affect and to use it appropriately. For your own safety? No. For the safety of someone else. So this is why I like attachment theory as a psychological theory, besides just its base utility clinically, is that it describes our relationship with God and Him taking responsibility for our eternal attachment security, and then Him calling us to love one another. Like, it just is that image. And how do we do that? And there's a lot here, but secure children learn to regulate affect. Insecure children do not. It takes a loving adult to teach you how to regulate affect. So, what time is it?
We probably don't have time.
Okay, well, these 4 minutes will be worth it, I think, if we have audio.
I bet we do.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment that the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So, I don't think we should be a still-faced people. And in our leadership, there's more that we could talk about. But in our leadership, if we foster security among one another, if we take some time to consider our own personal security, we will be in a much better place to be safe havens and secure bases for the people that we serve, knowing full well that Christ is the only secure base and safe haven that we have. So in our reflection of him, in our imitation of him, can we be that for one another and for the world? And I think that's the call, and we do that from a place of just resolute security in the cross. And that's our grounding place.
One of the takeaways from that for leaders, because when we're working with folks, it is far too often one of the big things that we hear from leaders is, I feel isolated, or I feel alone, or it's lonely at the top. Notice, like, in order for that child to get back to a healthy place, it needed the interaction of somebody else to respond to them and speak into them. I think about the model that Justin sets for us when he talks about the way his dad would say, hey, just remember tonight, when you step into that stadium, remember who you are and whose you are. We need to get rid of this isolated mentality that you're going in lone warrior into that elders meeting, or you're the only one at the table. Like, who is it that you have around you that before you step into your leadership arena, or before you step back into your home and your marriage tomorrow when you fly back home, or into relationships or the hard places in your life, is there anybody that you can call who can get into this routine with you of reminding you of who you are and whose you are? Because then you step into that meeting, you step into that position, you step into that job, you step into that relationship from a place of security outside of your abilities, which we all know will let us down at some point, can only carry us so far. And it brings us back to Jesus, and now we start bringing the gospel into our affect, the way that we put our emotions and reactions on display. And that impacts people and how they receive what it is that we have to give them in the gospel.
Yeah, so I think of it as person and performance. Is that I can comment on performance and help somebody develop their performance if they know that their personhood is loved and valued by me. But if they think that their person is contingent on their performance, then there's going to be an anxious system, and that homeostatic principle will cut us off,
Yeah.
right? But if we start with personhood, and we love, respect, and create a personhood connection, then performance, like President Snow's my boss in some things. Lonnie, you can attest to this. Like, because he and I have a really great relationship, he can say, Justin, you just laid a gigantic egg. Don't ever do that again. And like, I'll be like, oh, can I disagree with you? He's like, no. but I love you, man. I'm like, I love you too. We're fine. We'll make it. But like, there's real security in our personhood level relationship. So, you know, and he will listen to me if I say I think he laid a big egg. That security is like a necessary condition of any sort of adaptive change in leadership. And I know, like, we kind of did some complex talk, but it boils down to like that feeling. You know that feeling. You've had that feeling when you are secure with somebody that you can be real, versus insecure. I have to practice ego defense. Ego defenses just destroy systems. So, questions? I'll hang around for as long as I need to. What time do they start another one in here?
I think
Over the hour.
10:30. Real quick, before we do Q&A for just a minute, what we just did here was simply to help raise awareness, help us start thinking about it, pondering it, help us start valuing these ideas. We've come to see that that's just not enough to show up in our real lives, in practice, in the hard spaces. Because there's a behavioral gap that exists between being aware and pondering and valuing something and actually prioritizing and owning it. We've put together a couple of resources that can help you and the leaders around you continue to have this conversation. But what we genuinely long to do is to walk with you through those hard things. That's why PLI does learning communities. That's why we're plugged in with Grace Point. That's why he was talking, this isn't just a 1 hour thing, but it's an hour every week for a year. Because when the rubber hits the road, there's hard questions and stuff to process. We want to walk with you in that. These are some resources that can begin to help with that. You just scan this, and it can be a blessing to you. You had a question back there?
Yeah, I know there's different attachment styles. In your experience, like, are certain types more inclined to go in church, or do you find different ways to present the gospel to avoidant or anxious, or very anxious types? Like,
Yeah.
how do you avoidance go to church? Or
Maybe, do you think that somebody like canceled the next hour and I could?
Yeah.
Those are fantastic questions, and so there's an entire, it's really interesting, there's an entire body of literature, ironically in the evolutionary psychology department, on attachment to God. And the nature of it, and how attachment to God and faith formation, or the experience of faith, the subjective experience of faith, not the objective reality of faith, okay? How all of that forms, and what implications they are to how it relates. But it follows the patterns of, like, secure and dependent, or avoidant, dismissed. So it's the same anxiety that moves us out of security. We have two different copings. One is to avoid, and one is to depend. And there's long answers to this question, but basically it falls into those two categories. But what's ironic is really dismissing, avoidant people show up at church all the time. Because it's the same anxiety. They're not comfortable with intimacy and autonomy, right? So the preoccupied person is only comfortable with an enmeshed intimacy. And you'll notice that in their faith life lots of times. And they're like constantly preoccupied with whether God really actually loves them or not. And then, like, the dismissing, counter-dependent people is they get drawn into church because the church needs them. Counter-dependent people are classically avoidant, which is I need you to need me. And that makes me feel good. But I need you to need me so I can reject you to feel even safer.
Exactly.
And like, I don't know what the percentages are, but my experience is that, like, no offense, but senior pastors, like, will work, the church will, if they don't naturally already go this way, the church will go that way. They will push them this way, into being dismissive of their need of others. I don't need other people to be safe, because when I'm in close and around other people, I have to reject them. So there's a lot of mechanisms here for, like, the difference between faith formation and the implicit experience of, like, connection to God, and then, like, religious behavior. And sometimes those seem like completely contradictory.
Is a secure church attractive to avoidance and to anxious? Like, I know secure, I know that's what we're meant to be, I know that's what Jesus is, but I know that's repulsive to some people because it's, I can't reject you, or...
The secure church is adaptive, meaning they have the thing that everybody wants, but do they have mechanisms for making sure that these people who really want it and need it really bad know that they have it? Don't confuse the complacent church with the secure church, because entire bodies of people will end up kind of polarizing in these directions too, right? And decadent, well-endowed church bodies that are living off the inertia of the last, 100 years. I mean, I don't know if there are any of those around, but they naturally go to, well, we don't need to play ball with the wider church, with each other, with anything. And they become dismissive. But it's a form of insecurity, because decadence always makes us insecure. And there's a sclerosis that emerges from that decadence. Just a rigidity and almost a paralysis. And so that is like a ego defense mechanism of an entire system, is to be like, oh, we're fine. We like it this way. But there's some sort of mission that there's some people around you who don't know Jesus should know Jesus. Yeah, but we're okay. We're fine. Don't bother. Don't make us insecure. So
That's kind of wrapped up into that. Who are you and whose are you? Like, yes, we are forgiven children of God, but children of God are also sent people, right? So we're secured not in just where we are right now, but we're secure in the fact that God's calling us to care about others who don't yet belong here.
I'm going to pray so that people can go.
That'd be great.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for the security that you've given to us in Christ. We pray that that is a real and evident reality that is made known to us, that we make it known to one another, and that we make it known to a world that needs that security so desperately. I thank you for the assembled hearts and minds, for their leadership, for their love of you and of their neighbor. Equip us, enliven us with your Spirit. Send your Spirit to be with us, that we might be agents of adaptive, healthy, secure change in your name. Pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen.